Hi, welcome to the latest Navionics and saltwater boat angling webinar. Today we're going to talk about one of my favourite fish, a little sport fish. Not the biggest you'll catch, but one of my favourites, called a black bream. And there you can see a picture of one, an underwater picture, more of which later. We're going to be talking about various aspects of Black Bream. So let's go on and look at the agenda that we're going to work to today. So I'm going to talk about the biology of the animal. That includes some of its breeding behaviour and the general nesting behaviour that the little fish take part in. Marine conservation, very big part of Black Bream biology these days. Bream don't have a quota. A commercial quota, and they have been overexploited, and because they aggregate in large shoals when they're breeding, they are quite vulnerable to overexploitation. I'm also going to talk about something called the Black Bream Project, which some of these pictures have come from, and hopefully you'll be impressed by those. This is run by a chap called Matt Doggett, who is a diver, an instructor, and an underwater cameraman. So more about that later. Plus, of course, how do we catch them, which is probably the most crucial part of it. The best way, certainly from my point of view, of how I like to catch black bream and fish for them. And finally, we'll just have a run through of some of the other bream species that there are. There are quite a few now in British waters. As our waters warm up, more and more of these Mediterranean type species have moved in. We've always caught them in UK waters, but they're becoming more and more prevalent. We're not quite sure why, or whether it is just global warming or some other factor, but there are now 6 or 7 species that get regularly caught. But the most popular at the moment, or certainly widespread, is the black bream. So firstly, let's look at biology, and here you can see a beautiful underwater shot of a male in resting mode. He's just sitting over the top of his nest, which is this area here, and more on that later. You can just see some of his black stripes and some of the colouring that's coming on, but he's actually quite a calm little fish there. Nothing's threatening him, and we'll look at that in a bit more detail later. So let's start with the habitat of the bream. Well, they're prevalent. The most popular places you'll find them are rocky reefs. They like those areas because they're full of invertebrates, lots of different types of animals to feed on, crabs and worms and prawns and all that kind of stuff. And reefs, particularly in breeding times, are where you'll find huge aggregations of bream. They like broken ground as well. These areas where there's a bit of sand, a few rocks, again for the same reasons. Don't tend to breed in areas like that, but they will accumulate. Certainly, the non-breeding animals will accumulate in those areas during the summer months. And over the years, I've caught a lot in broken ground areas that we have off the Sussex coast. This sort of rocky area you can see on the slide here is typical of it. And of course, on the top right, you've got a classic example of one of their things they like eating, which is a small crab. They like wrecks, although really they tend to accumulate in wrecks or aggregate in wrecks in the autumn. Certainly the bigger specimens do. Not quite sure why, but it's after their breeding season they will go, and some of the bigger ones, certainly that I've seen, have been caught on wrecks in September and October, and that goes for the whole of the English Channel right the way down. And of course, a wreck is just a reef, isn't it? To the fish, it's just a reef. It's covered in food and other fish, and from that point of view, it's it's a great environment for bream. You'll also find them in estuaries. They don't breed in estuaries, but particularly in the West Country, where you have deep water estuaries with lots of and estuaries that are not particularly brackish, because bream have a relatively low tolerance to that. You'll find other species, particularly giltheads, will go quite a long way out some of the estuaries in the West Country, as many of you who fish for them will know. So those are the 4 main habitats. They can be found elsewhere. People catch them off a beach and off piers and marinas as well, where they accumulate. They'll go where the food is. So let's look at their breeding. This is the most interesting part of black bream, as far as I'm concerned. Black bream are protogynous. What does that mean? It means that 70% of all the females, most of these fish are born female, 70% of them turn into males at about 30 to 35 centimeters, about 70%. It's quite common in fish. They do a fish species, wrasse species, a lot of Mediterranean and tropical fish do it, and other species too. It's a way of guaranteeing a higher survival rate, I think. This fish you can see here is a male fish. It's got a very, very distinct colouring. This is a beautiful picture taken by a mate of mine called Paul Harmon. I think that's Sam Wadman's hand there holding it. And you can see that lovely azure colour over the over its around its eye and over the top of its head, and also some of the other scales you can see on its back are beautifully coloured. That is a sign of a breeding male fish. Females are smaller and duller. They don't really need to get got up with all that livery. You know, they don't tend to get very big. You do get females up to 2 or 3 pounds, but it is quite unusual. So nesting, another interesting thing. Nesting and courtship. Well, black bream go black when they're courting. I mean, that's why they're called black bream. You don't see it, you know, in when you've got them in the boat. You can see they've got black stripes, but actually that picture you can see there on the screen is very clear. It shows you the black bream on the right is in courtship mode, and he's courting that female on the left there. He's trying to impress her, and he goes absolutely jet black. And there's another one you can see lurking in the top right hand side of that picture, and he's actually over his nest, and what he's trying to do is to encourage that female to come in and lay her eggs on the nest. So these males make nests, and they like to have a specific type of substrate to do it on. They like hard rock surface to put the eggs on, but they go for places where they can actually clear the substrate away. So fine silty sand or gravel, which makes one or two of the places I'm going to talk about later particularly attractive to them. I mean, they'll breed in all sorts of places as long as they can find that kind of substrate. But there are big concentrations of them in areas where this kind of hard surface is available. Here we go. This is a male fish actually moving a rock away from his nest, and in fact, it looks to me like something's underneath that rock, and I think it's one of the cameraman's gizmos there that's got stuck under the. But they will clean their nest and make it very tidy for the female, and they want to make sure everything is away from it. They guard the nest, of course, and this is the most important thing, and actually the bit where the angling potentially has an impact on black bream stocks, because if you're catching a black bream when it's guarding its nest and you take it away, in come the wrasse, in come all the other bream, and they'll eat all the eggs and crabs and other things. So there is an issue there, but they have been known to go straight back down to the nest that they came up from when they're put back in the water, which is quite interesting. So the male will guard the nest. He won't just have predators to chase off, but other males, and quite often the other males want to fertilize the eggs that are laid by other bream, female bream. And we have some evidence to suggest that some males don't make nests. Rather, they actually just spend their time lurking about, waiting to use somebody else's. And they have been known to chase other males off a nest that's been made. Obviously, we're not quite sure about this, but we think that multiple females will lay in a nest. So one will come along, he'll fertilize her eggs, and then another will come along, and so on. And that guarantees a sort of genetic diversity in the stock. The Black Bream Project, which is where a lot of these pictures come from, is run by, as I said, a chap called Matt Doggett. Do go and have a look at that website, because he's got some absolutely fantastic video and film and pictures on that site of his activities on, looking at black bream nests. He did it in Lyme Bay. That's a picture of Lyme Bay there. And he basically set up, there's another little shot of Line Bay. He basically set up, he's a diver, I should say. He's a professional diver, very experienced. He's also a cameraman. And what he did is he set up time-lapse cameras around the nests. And that picture that's just come up, you could see, shows one little bream actually attacking his camera because he thought it was a threat to him. So he set all these time-lapse cameras up, and he's got all this amazing footage. It is a proper research project. He's done it on these breeding sites. He's also done this on another site, which we'll talk about in a minute, called the Kingmere. And really what he's doing is trying to find out more about the behaviour of black bream and try and fill in some of the gaps. I mean, I mentioned earlier about whether black bream actually will come back to a nest, and you can see a nesting site there at the bottom. And you know, he's instrumental in trying to work that sort of thing out. And then we move on to marine conservation zones. I think it's worth talking about this in a little bit of detail. Line Bay is a marine conservation zone. It's one of the first, but there are many, many marine conservation zones all around the coast, and it's part of a network, a marine network, all which as you can see here from this map, these green and dark green, light green, purple areas are all marine conservation zones that have been set up and designated in the last 3 or 4 years. It's part of a Europe-wide attempt to try and protect some of the wildlife habitats that there are in Europe, and we were tasked with finding particular habitats around the coast. They're not really designed to protect fish stocks. This is about protecting the whole environment. So they're designated on the basis of what is there. So it might be a unique chalk bed, which is what we're going to talk about in a minute. It might be something to do with eelgrass beds, which is certainly the case in Chichester and 1 or 2 other places. Estuary complexes, there's bits of the Thames estuary that are designated. Beachy Head along the cliffs from Beachy Head going west towards Newhaven, that's a particularly unique type of chalk ledge, and so on. And these have been set up around the country in order to you know, help to protect those areas. Now, the one I want to talk about is on the Kingmere, which is basically in West Sussex. You can see there's a map of West Sussex, a Navionics map, and there is, we'll look at this in more detail later, this inset map. You can see that's the area that we want to talk about in the square. It's just off the coast of Sussex. West Sussex, it's chalk and sandstone, particularly chalk ledges. That's one of the things that it's been designated for. It's the only one that's been designated for a finned fish, and there are restrictions on all activity in the area. So the way that they worked it, and this was done with the agreement and the cooperation of all the stakeholders, commercial fishermen, anglers, divers, sailors, everybody. It was a long process, and we all had to come to an agreement. It's a bit of a messy compromise that we've got here, but basically the idea from our point of view as anglers was to protect black bream stocks, because we knew that they were being decimated by beam trawlers in the area that were trying to catch large amounts of bass, which of course is a completely different subject. So we came down to a zonal management system. The whole area is a no trawl zone, and apart from this area where trawlers are allowed through in the months that the fish are not breeding, so that's after the end of June, and it's this was a compromise. They said that they needed this area to turn their nets round or something. I mean, really what they want to do is go and catch large amounts of bass. And of course, the bream are aggregating all over these areas, and they are a bycatch. But it was a compromise in order to get what we really needed, which is these nest sites protected, and these are marked here in these orange and green areas here. This is where all the nest sites are on the Kingmere. There are 4 zones that nobody can do anything in that zone. Everything is banned, even anglers. In this area, anglers are allowed to fish there, and I'll talk about how and what restrictions there are in a minute. And we're also allowed to fish in these areas too, with the same restrictions. Trawlers are banned, and netsmen are banned from these areas, and they are allowed to pot on the rocks around here. So there is restricted commercial fishing activity. You can see the key there. This is subtidal chalk, which is one of the reasons that this was being protected. And this is infilitral rock with sediment on it, which is what the bream particularly like, because they can fan away the sediment and get hard rock underneath, which they'll then use to nest. This area here is what we call the Paleo Channel, and it's where the old River Ada riverbed went through. There is a lot of dredging that goes on in this area, and they have got a license to dredge in the Kingmere now. This predated the designation of the Marine Conservation Zone and does not come under the jurisdiction of the local IFCA, so they can't really do anything to restrict it. However, Lavar's Tarmac, who are the dredging operation out of Shoreham, they have voluntarily agreed not to do any dredging at all during the breeding season, because we were worried that a spoil plume would envelop the eggs and kill them all. And although it's fairly light spoil plume, they have agreed not to do that, which is quite a that's quite a responsible way for them to behave. We hope. Anyway, so moving on from the Kingmere, what about angling restrictions? Well, we decided on what we call an angling code of conduct. I mean, this really was already in place before the actual designation, but we just sort of put it into concrete. There's a 4 bream bag limit, which means nobody can take more than 4 bream on a trip per day on a boat, and that's really been a voluntary thing anyway from an angler's point of view. I mean, people don't tend to be fishmongers these days. There are some people who want to fill up their bags and their freezers with bream. I mean, I like to take 1, maybe 2 for the barbecue, but really, I put all the fish back that I catch, more or less. But 4 bream is, it's a good day's fishing. Maximum size of 40 centimetres. That's quite a big fish, but you won't catch a British record on the Kingmere as a result of that. But that's because we want to maintain the big breeding males. We want to keep them big and healthy, and we'll put them back when we catch them that size. And of course, there's the lowest limit we take is probably about 30 centimetres. So that's it's quite a good range. We return all female fish on that area. That's been agreed. We've always done that anyway. I mean, that was always something that anglers do. And we use barbless hooks where possible. We can't force people to do this, but I mean, I try and use them. And certainly, if I've got barbed hooks to use, I take the barbs off them before and it doesn't really make any difference to the catch rate. And then we use careful anchoring. We have what we call sacrificial anchors, which we use to, and they bend out of the rocks. So let's go on and talk about catching bream. That's a bit more interesting in some ways. This is a crew of people I go out with occasionally from Shoreham. She likes it too. He's one of the local anglers. I would like to just say that the ports of Littlehampton and Shoreham and Brighton rely a huge amount on these charter boats using the Kingmere, which is why we fought so hard to make sure that angling wasn't restricted any further, because they bring in millions of pounds of revenue to these towns, and they're a very important part of the economy. So here we go. There's an interesting picture. That's somebody a couple of boats fishing on the Kingmere. A nice view of one of our rods and a rig. So we'll talk about classic bream rigs here. There's 2 really I'm going to talk about. A wishbone rig, pretty straightforward. Two, I find these quite effective, not so much on the Kingmere, but in other areas, on wrecks sometimes. And you're just using a 3-hook system where you have this sort of wishbone here, very effective. And then another one, which is probably everybody's favourite, is a paternoster. Please excuse the quality of the picture there, but this is a fairly standard rig with 3 hooks and 1 down. I like to use 1 down. Sorry about the scrolling. I like to use 1 hook down on the bottom, and then this gives you more chance of catching bream in mid-water, where they tend to spend a lot of time. Sensitive tips. I don't know if you can see this, but I like to use a tip like that, really sensitive, and I'll explain why in a minute. On my rod, low diameter line, braid stuff. I tend to use stuff like this, J braid and so forth. Small hooks, size 1 or less. I tend to try and go for stuff. I don't know if you can see that. There's a size 1 hook, even less, because they have got very small mouths and those little teeth. Light leads, because you want to be able to feel, again I'll explain this in a minute, feel the bites, and then simple rigs basically, because you're going to lose tackle on the kingmere in particular. So chum trails we used in techniques. I like to use a chum trail, either an onion bag with some guts in it, or actually a frozen bucket of it, and that releases the stuff, the material through the tide gradually. Means you can bring fish into the boat, and I trot the tide. I trot down the tide. I'll hold the rod, I'll feel for it, feel the bites, and trot it back. Get a bite, you just let a bit of line out, and you can feel the lead bouncing on the bottom. You get a much better catch rate that way, and they are aggressive feeders when they get going. It's got to be said. Nice little story. A friend of mine, Jim Whippy, actually, launch editor of the magazine, was on the Kingmere fishing on the back of a boat with a guy next to him. Jim was catching all the fish. David wasn't. Couldn't work out why. David thought it was his gear. Jim swapped over rods, and Jim carried on catching lots of fish. And the reason was because he was trotting and feeling for bites, and he had originally a very sensitive rod. On wrecks, same tackle really, and this is a picture of actually a skipper who's fishing for pollock with very light tackle, but the same principle. They tend to aggregate above the wreck, so you've got to fish with light tackle, and again, you tend to get bigger specimens on wrecks, and you can do that while somebody's fishing for pollock on the same wreck. So to bait, well, they'll eat anything. Black bream, as most of you probably know, will eat anything. My favourite for fishing on the Kingmere or other reef areas where they're accumulating is really squid. A nice strip there demonstrated that, because it's very, it's durable. It'll last 4 or 5 casts. You can put 3 bits of squid on your paternoster, and if you miss one bite, you can be guaranteed pretty much that the squid will still be there for the next one. So that's the squid. Ragworm, very effective. A couple of my fishing mates swear by ragworm. They think it's better, but in some places it will be. I mean, bream will go for ragworm, particularly off the beach actually. Fish baits, well, they'll eat anything like that. Again, mackerel, garfish, strips of garfish. You don't have squid or mackerel will work just as well for bream. I mean, as I said earlier, they're aggressive feeders, and when they're feeding, they are feeding, it really doesn't matter, what you put down in front of them. And then, of course, the crabs is another one if you can get them. Gilt-head bream in particular are partial to crabs, and that's because they spend most of the time going into feeding areas looking for crabs. So if you can get them, they do work, but they are less durable, and obviously quite expensive. So you have to pick your moments when you fish for them. Fish with squid, with crabs rather. I beg your pardon. So let's just have a look at 1 or 2 other species of bream that we can catch in British waters. There's a nice picture of a bream that Jim Whippy caught on one of our trips, where we took the sky cameras. You can see the camera on the right hand side, and that was when we were campaigning to get angling, prevent angling from being restricted on the reefs on the Kingmere. So the gilthead is the first one. Actually, this is my favourite. This is you can see this is an illustration. Very clear. They have a band of gold in the summer on their head above their eye. There's one that my son caught in an estuary in Cornwall. They are amazing fish and such hard fighters. In fact, in some ways, they fight even harder than black bream. And in shallow water, they're fantastic fish to catch. I mean, they really are. They're increasing numbers of them in southwestern approaches, and they're even making it up as far as West Sussex now, and the Isle of Wight are catching them. And we think they're breeding pretty prolifically as well. So, and at certain times of the year, they will go up estuaries, targeting crabs and specific types of invertebrates. And if you can just get there, because some of these estuaries have been quite shallow, if you can get there at the right time of tide and be there before they get there, you can have some fantastic sport in shallow waters. Other bream, so Pandora's bream. I don't know much about this one. I've never caught one. And this is an illustration. They've got a slightly thicker lip system than the others, slightly larger lips and a bigger eye. Red bream, well, they're much more common these days. People catch them quite often, especially down in the southwest approaches. They are actually, I'm told, even tastier fish to eat than gilthead breams. And here's a better illustration of a red bream. A Couch's bream, or Couch's bream, or various different pronunciations of it. And this one is, again, it's a reddy sort of grey colour. Again, quite distinctive from the other bream. Here's a picture of one. You can see it's got a sort of steep head, sort of pinky orange back and dorsal fin, but clearly a bream. And like the gilthead bream, it's got that kind of a very thick-lipped mouth and very sharp teeth. So raised bream, this is a slightly unusual one. I think you tend to catch these in deeper water out in the western approaches. And rather prematurely, but there you are. There's a picture just to finish off today of a black bream caught by Sam Wadman last year. And you can see that beautiful azure strip across its eyes and across its back. And that was fresh out of the water. And they are such fantastic little fish. And we need to do everything we possibly can to protect them and make sure that we can continue to enjoy fishing for them in the coming years. There is more to come on the Kingmere Marine Conservation Zone. For those who live in Sussex, there is currently work being done to make sure that when it comes to the redesignation of the Marine Conservation Zone, that we know as much as we possibly can about how much angling is affecting the breeding stock, because we don't know. And going back to Matt Dog, he's involved in that. He's going to be doing some work to to find out what kind of mortality rates there are, I think, and also just to see what happens when you catch a bream and put it back for sure, whether they go back down to the sea, back to their nest or not. And this kind of work is really important. I mean, it's quite scary because we don't know what the end result's going to be, but we have to be prepared for whatever eventuality we find. So thank you very much, everybody, for tuning in. You can find out more about saltwater boat angling at our website. Of course, the latest issue is just out. We've got lots about black bream. There's if anyone wants to get in touch with me, please feel free to email me at publisher@saltwaterpublishing.co.uk, and please go and see look at Matt's website. He's got some spectacular stuff on it. He's got some videos of these bream moving about and doing what they do, and some lovely pictures of the substrate of the bream. Oh, it's wonderful. So I highly recommend you going to see that and have a look at that on his website. So there you go. And there you go, that dog again. Thank you very much indeed. Saltwater boat angling signing off. We're doing another one of these next month. Look out for the timing of it. Probably the same similar timing, last Friday of the month. But we'll be emailing everybody about that soon. And thanks, of course, to our friends at Navionics, who we are doing this in association with. Thank you very much.